Good afternoon. It is an honor to be with you today. My name is Mark Bates, and besides being married to Pastor Colleen, I'm a math professor at Oxnard College and a proud member of this congregation for over 30 years. As we continue through this pandemic, our minds have been challenged in a number of ways. You may be thinking about people you miss seeing, activities you may miss doing, or just how far you can venture outside your bubble and still feel safe. But if there's one larger theme I've heard from a number of people, it's how the pandemic has changed our view of time. I've heard from those whose daily routines have been upended with having to work from home, throw in kids needing to go to school from their living room, and all boundaries between time go out the window. Ironically, being in one place all day without a regular commute has made some of my friends feel like they have less time than they had before. Others, though, seem to have nothing but time, and I've actually had a few people complain to me about running out of books to read or household projects to do. Imagine that. Others have mentioned to me that since every day feels the same, they get up and sometimes don't know what day of the week it is. And of course, for many of us, the stress may not be in the act of quarantine itself, but not knowing how much time it's going to take before this virus leaves us for good. Finally, when I think about time, I reflect on the theory of relativity, not the one created by Einstein, but the more humorous version. The closer you are to your relatives, the longer time seems. However, our Creator is the God of time, and one of the joys of this pandemic for me has been reading through the book of Esther with one of my Bible study groups, where time is a prominent theme. But before we get there, let me give you a brief overview of this book in case it's been a while since you read it. This account takes place nearly 500 years before Christ in the city of Susa, the capital of Persia. A century earlier, the Israelites had been taken into exile by the Babylonians, which Pastor Nikki so eloquently described on Sunday. But when Babylon later falls to Persia, King Cyrus allows the exile to return back to their homeland. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah describe those who chose to return and how they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, the temple, and ultimately rebuilt God's people once again as a nation. Yet, while many Israelites decide to leave Persia for Jerusalem, others decide to remain, perhaps more comfortable with the life they have created in a foreign land than returning back to their roots. They live in peace with the Persians, but with the tension that comes from different cultures in the same space. So here's where we find ourselves in Esther. This book is rare in that it is named after a woman, only Ruth shares that honor, and it is unique in that it does not explicitly reference God or prayer. However, we will see that God works throughout this well-written story. The scene opens with a feast held by Xerxes, now the king of Persia. During the revelry, he requests the presence of Queen Vashti to show off her great beauty to the people, but she refuses. As a result, she loses her royal position, and the king conducts a nationwide search for a new queen. In a precursor to the reality television we see today, the eventual winner of this search is a young woman named Esther. What the king doesn't know, however, is that she is in fact an Israelite orphan who's being cared for by her older cousin, Mordecai. Not only does Mordecai advise her to keep those facts secret from the king, but early in the book he hears about a plan to assassinate Xerxes and passes the details to Esther, who tells the king and stops the plot. Not everyone is happy with Mordecai, though. Haman, the highest-ranking official under Xerxes, wants the royal staff to bow down and pay homage to him. At the king's gate, however, Mordecai refuses. As one of God's people, he does not bow down to human authority, but only to God himself. When this happens repeatedly, Haman comes up with a plan to destroy the Jews throughout the kingdom. By telling lies to the king about the Israelites, that they are a lawless people who don't follow the king's commands, he convinces Xerxes to approve an order that allows any Persian official to annihilate the Jews and plunder their possessions, but only on a single day of the year, determined by chance. Esther 3:7 describes what happens next. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, they cast pur, which means the lot, before Haman for the day and for the month, and the lot fell on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. This seemingly random result works well for God's people, giving them the longest possible notice before this fateful day is to occur. Now, this is the first specific reference to time in the book of Esther, and I believe that God is giving the Jewish people a message to be ready. While those who stayed in Persia made the choice to do so, they were not in their homeland and not truly safe. Many of us can identify with living in a different land from that of our ancestors, and ultimately, our home is not even here on earth, but with our Heavenly Father. As long as we are away from our final home, we need to be ready for the attacks that the world may impose upon us. Going back to the story, Mordecai is in despair hearing about the king's edict, and his woes make their way to the palace and back to Esther. He pleads with her to go before the king and explain why this is all a big mistake. Easier said than done, however, because anyone approaching the king unsolicited faces instant death, and Esther knows that only by the king extending his royal scepter can she avoid this fate. When she explains her fear to Mordecai, he replies by stating that the extermination of the Jews will extend all the way to her and her family, which of course includes him. He ends his plea with these words: "Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this." His message to Esther is simple: be brave. Since Esther couldn't really take pride in her rise to power as queen, Mordecai had to assume that God had put her in that position in order for her to step in and save the day. When we look at our own history, we see people who did not set out to effect change, but were brave in the moment, and in doing so, changed the course of events. If you've ever felt as though God has put you in a particular situation at a particular time to act or speak for Him, you may understand what Esther is going through. The theme of time arises in this story again after Esther takes courage and approaches the king. Not only does he extend his scepter, sparing her life, but he says, "Whatever you want, even to half the kingdom, and it will be given to you." While this is the moment that Esther, Mordecai, and the Jewish people have been waiting for, Esther learns another lesson: to be patient. She uses time to her advantage, and instead of making her appeal right away, she invites the king and Haman to a banquet. At that event, she invites them to a second banquet where she promises to present her real request. This use of time serves two purposes. First, it literally and figuratively whets the appetite of the king, waiting to know how he can serve his queen. But second, it gives Haman time to dwell on his lofty status in the kingdom. After all, only he was invited to dine with the king and queen. Yet he is still so angry with Mordecai that his family convinces him to build a 75-foot gallows on which to hang him. Meanwhile, in the royal house, Mordecai is recognized by King Xerxes for his earlier prevention of the king's assassination. And at the second banquet, when Esther eventually explains to the king the danger that her people are under, all is revealed. Haman is executed on the very gallows he constructed, and the Jews are given protection from those who wish to do them harm. If you haven't read Esther in a while, it's a short 10 chapters, easy to read in one sitting. After all, we have nothing but time. But many Christians may read the book absent from much theology or reference to God and ask, why is this even in the Bible? This is a lesson that scholars have wrestled with as well. I believe that God has one more lesson for us here, and that is to be trusting. You see, God works in His time, and if He can act through the entire arc of His chosen people in the Old Testament, and if He can place His Son into our world at just the right time to show His love to all of us, then He can work through any issues of time that we face, throughout our lives, throughout our weeks, and even throughout today. Whatever day it is, I'm not really sure. May you find the Lord in this moment, and thank you for sharing your time with me today.
This has been Wednesday Word with the Free Methodist Church of Santa Barbara. We hope that you will join us for worship this Sunday. Our home church video will be posted at 8 o'clock a.m. on our YouTube channel.